Go ahead.
Sunday Conversation. Tom Dienhart, Brian Neubert join me. I want to thank our sponsors. And, of course, that's Follett's, Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, 6th Street Dive restaurant who's been good to us and serving here in Lafayette. And, of course, East End Grill, First Source Bank, Charters Team Remax Ability Plus, and Home Field Apparel, who's been a sponsor and actually has been a podcast sponsors of our Monday shows. We're going to talk a little bit about the new Gold and Black T-shirt line that they put together. We had some fun with that. We'll hit that on the back end of the show. But we'll start with the news of the week. And the big news, obviously, for Jeff Brom and company is getting a commitment out of Brady Allen. Brady Allen, a quarterback, played from Fort Branch, Indiana, Gibson Southern High School. 6'5", just 16 years old. We have some video of him that I put on Friday headlines that WLFI provided for us. He looks the part, Brian. Certainly at that age and that size, seems to be a very good get for Jeff Brom and company.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on a lot of people's radar for a very long time because he was very advanced early in his high school career. You know, he was 6'5". 180, 190 pounds, whatever it might have been as a high school freshman, showed the arm strength right away, plays in an offense down there that's a college style of offense, has put up really big numbers. I think he's thrown for 5,000 yards and like 60 touchdowns or something like that in just 2 years of varsity football, understanding one of those years was a freshman season. Just kind of the prototype, a guy with good size, presumably good pocket presence, strong arm, should be able to make all the throws, athletic enough to not be a detriment there, to potentially be a plus level athlete for his size, for his body type, for his arm profile, all of this stuff. Kind of your straight out of central casting sort of quarterback. And that's important for Purdue, obviously, because, you know, as much as Purdue has looked for a dual threat element at quarterback here these last couple of years, there's never going to come a day, as long as Jeff Brom and his staff are here, where job description number one is to hang in the pocket and throw the ball up the field. And that seems like what Brady Allen is, you know, kind of straight out of central casting for.
Yeah, and again, he looks the part. He's got that great size. I thought it was interesting. Only 31 touchdowns, 4 interceptions as a freshman. I think he had 29 touchdowns last year, but didn't see his interception numbers. But I know Gibson Southern finished 9-3 last year. And Tom, you had a chance to talk to Nick Hart, his coach, down there at Gibson Southern, and again, a school that's right on US 41, about 10 miles north of Evansville, and a pretty good sized school. You know, there's big schools down there, Castle, and also the Evansville schools that Gibson Southern plays in. But tell me about what you gleaned from that conversation. Of course, a story that's on our site right now.
Yeah, good guy, Nick Hart. Gibson Southern is a 3A school. I always like trying to figure out how big of a school these guys are playing at, what their competition's like. Just to give myself and readers sort of a little bit of context, Fort Branch has about 3,000 people, as you said, Alan, north of Evansville, 10, 20 miles or so. Yeah, he talked about his monster arm. I think we saw that in some of the highlights that have been posted on our site the last few days. And boy, as Brian said too, right at essential casting, when you think about the classic Purdue quarterback, right? The Jim Everett frame, 6'5". He's going to already about 200 pounds. You got to figure he's going to get 215, 220. Smart kid, according to his head coach. I asked him if he's a leader. He said, of course, he's a great leader. He's a guy his teammates like a lot. Interestingly, guys, he has no connections to Purdue, according to his head coach. And he seems like he's sold on the Boilermakers. That was one of my worries. You know, Brian talked about, I think, a message board post. He didn't recall Purdue ever getting a commitment this early. And, Brian, you've been doing this for a long time. So you're always worried, don't you? Oh, boy, can Purdue keep this guy? He's got 2 years of high school left. We're going to be talking about this guy, have him overanalyzed the next 24 months before he hits campus. And he will hit campus early as in January of 2022. But, again, a great get for Purdue. And I'm really eager to see how this guy develops.
Yeah. Brian, you know, you talk about him and a lot of other schools, the fact that there were no camps this summer or spring, He was offered by Wisconsin, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, I believe. Talk of others that might have been interested in him from that standpoint. How do you view that? And then my follow-up question I want to make sure I ask is about now the makeup of the Purdue quarterback room. It's kind of interesting because you get a very different quarterback in Sam Jackson for the class of 21, and yet you get more of the guy what we deem as the Jeff Brom prototype in Brady Allen.
Yeah, starting with the first part of your question about the pandemic and its potential effect on his recruitment, I think the storyline on him that I always gleaned was that it was Purdue, it was Notre Dame, it was Ohio State. Purdue did a hell of a job recruiting this kid. They made they really, really resonated with this guy from day one. He visited, I don't even know how many times, a ton. So I think the important point to make up front is that had things happened this summer, Purdue might have still gotten this guy. It's not like they got him only because he couldn't camp at Notre Dame or couldn't camp at Ohio State. He always wanted to decide before his junior year. He didn't have to do that, though. If he was dead set on, giving Notre Dame and Ohio State every chance to recruit him, he could have still done that.
Yeah,
he could have waited. Obviously, Purdue did a hell of a job winning this kid over. That being said, obviously, this summer he didn't have a chance to go to a lot of the camps he probably would have gone to. Those schools didn't have a chance to come see him in person in the spring, watch him throw. That kind of kept his recruiting process where it was. And he had a bunch of offers early, a bunch of really good offers. But again, the single most important point to make here is that if he wanted something more, if he wanted something else, before committing to Purdue, he still could have done that. He could have waited. There was nothing obligating him whatsoever to commit now. That's just what he always wanted to do. But I think the storyline here is not who didn't offer him, but the job Purdue did recruiting him and winning him over. And obviously they did a really, really good job building a relationship with him, did a really, really good job selling him on their offense, selling him on their opportunity, and got themselves a hell of a prospect, it would seem.
Jeff Brom, obviously a Louisville guy. I know that's on the other side of the state from Evansville, but Louisville has been annexed by Indiana, it seems like, half the time as well. So relates well. But it's an interesting study, and Brian will have a comment too because he knows a lot of these guys, watched him in recruiting. But Purdue's history in southern Indiana has been really interesting. You got Mike Phipps, Bob Greasy, Curtis Painter, Joey Elliott, Danny Etling, on down the line. I know I'm missing somebody there. But you've got a lot of quarterbacks from down there. Tom, in your view, any rhyme or reason to that? And then I'll let Brian pipe in too, because I know he was involved much with Curtis Painter and Joey Elliott in those stories, and Danny Etling when they came to Purdue.
I can't figure it out, Alan. It mystifies me. I'm glad it's happened. Personally, it seems like anytime you get south of Indianapolis, well, that state turns red real quick. Typically, Purdue doesn't recruit well south of Indianapolis. It seems like basketball or football. But when it comes to quarterbacks, as you talked about, the roll call of southern Indiana prepsters who have matriculated north to West Lafayette over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years is pretty impressive. Talked about Bob Greasy from Evansville, Mike Phipps from Columbus, Danny Etling from Terre Haute, Curtis Painter, Bob Greasy again, Evansville. And then you have, just a litany of good signal callers who have been Southern Indiana guys. And what's interesting too, there's two more great quarterbacks from that state the last 20 years. Rex Grossman from Bloomington, who of course went to Florida. And then Jake Cutler from Santa Claus, Indiana, who, of course, went to Vanderbilt. So, again, Southern Indiana seems to have something that's water down there. They've produced a lot of great quarterbacks over the years. And thank goodness for Purdue's sake, a lot of them, like I said, have gone up and wore the old gold and black and done very well, too.
When you think about Phipps and Greasy being college football Hall of Famers, Curtis Painter being one of the Big Ten's all-time leading pass in terms of numbers, Joey Elliott had to wait his time patiently to get a chance, but did have a very good year in 2009. Danny Etling had his troubles at Purdue, but went on to LSU. These are not little league guys. These were all big time college contributors. Brian, I don't know, I remember Jared Zwilling and guys that Purdue's gotten from the Pocket City over the years. Anything that you see, any trend you see of why that might be? Is it just that reputation for quarterbacks that has a big part of this?
Well, I think quarterback kind of transcends a lot of the stuff we talk about in recruiting, about, recruiting territories and who has the most pull where, because quarterbacks look for two things. They look for opportunity first and foremost. They look for style of play. Probably those two things above all else. Purdue historically, has had a pretty favorable style of play for quarterbacks, and I think that has resonated with those guys as much as anything. But also, every guy we just listed here had a varying array of options. It's not like all of these guys were, first team parade All-Americans or whatever it might be, who had offers from everybody in the country. Some of them were really, really high-end recruits, obviously Brady Allen being the most recent. But, sometimes at quarterback, you're the first to offer. You offer a good situation. Quarterbacks almost always commit early. It just kind of works out that way. But I think that, when we talk about, Purdue maybe not having as much pull in Southern Indiana as they might other places, I think quarterback is the position that's kind of exempt from that because of style of play, opportunity, and things like that. So that's kind of what comes to mind there. But it is kind of a strange coincidence that, when you look at basketball, as soon as you get south of Bloomington, Columbus, that area, whatever it may be, you might even say south of Indianapolis, it becomes the Bermuda Triangle for basketball recruiting. You go there and you just disappear. But in football, Purdue's been able to pull all of these quarterbacks a lot of them have gone on to have great careers out of Southern Indiana. It is a very strange coincidence.
Hey, Rex Grossman was a national recruit.
Yeah.
Jay Cutler really wasn't. Brian, do you remember if Purdue was involved with either of those two guys on a serious level?
I think anytime Purdue recruits a Bloomington kid, I think they're banging their head against the wall. So I don't know if Rex Grossman, I can't remember their level of involvement with him. I remember there being some involvement with Jay Cutler, but I think they might have recruited him as a safety, if I recall correctly. That's the urban legend I've heard years later. Because he was a very good athlete, and he was not Purdue would not have been the only school that recruited him for something other than quarterback.
Yeah. And yes, and I think there was, I don't know who was here at Purdue at the time too, that he wasn't walking into a situation. It's interesting too. Is it great?
Cutler had a high school teammate who went to Purdue. I can't remember his name.
Cole Seafrig?
Who?
No, who was it? Who was it?
I'll think of it, but I know.
Not Goldsberry?
Yeah, man, John Goldsberry.
Yeah.
Did Cutler go to Heritage Hills?
What's that?
Did Cutler go to Heritage Hills?
I'll have to double check. I thought they were. I can look real quick. I thought they were high school teammates.
Yeah, check that out while we're doing that, because I think that, yes, Goldsberry, who was an excellent special teams guy and a tough-nosed football player, and contributed a lot at Purdue in the early 2000s. And you go back, and really Brady Allen may be the highest. There were no rankings when Mike Phipps and Bob Greasy came around. Bob Greasy was a throw-in, at quarterback.
Heritage Hills. Yep, he did go to Heritage Hills. Huh.
Yeah. So Bob, you got Greasy, who wasn't highly recruited. Mike Phipps was somewhat highly recruited. Curtis Painter was a good prospect. I don't remember, Brian, who else was really in the hunt for Curtis. Joey Elliott, and again, Etling might have been the highest recruited guy in that group, I guess, or at least the highest ranked. And Brady Allen looks like he may surpass that by the time he's done.
Yeah, something to keep in mind about like Danny Etling. He had pretty considerable Purdue connections.
Yeah.
Remember Joe Holland was his cousin, things like that.
Gotcha.
Curtis Painter, remember, came to camp. He didn't necessarily have big-time offers early on. He did the camp thing. Purdue loved him at camp. Offered him in the summer. He committed early. Had anybody really seen him, watched him throw the football, seen how big and kind of physically imposing he was, seen his arm strength, he was a guy who was probably your classic example of a guy who would have had a lot of offers had anybody actually seen him. I don't know if anybody did.
Yeah.
Because being from Vincennes, it's not exactly a magnifying glass on college football prospects.
I just remember his green uniforms and Jim Chaney. The first time
Yeah,
I talked to him about Jim Chaney, loved Curtis Painter and that throwing arm that he had. Of course, he started out as I think he redshirted right his first year, wore number 17. I can remember talking to Jim after one of the spring games early on. That he said that Curtis Painter, he's going to be an NFL guy, and he was right. He was an
right.
NFL guy. He did get a chance to play in the league for a
Well,
while.
what I actually remember about Curtis Painter is I don't remember who they were, but Purdue was in on some national quarterbacks in that class. Curtis Painter came to camp, and they tapped out of those guys. They said, we're taking this guy. So I remember thinking to myself at the time when I found out that kid must have been really good at camp because Purdue backed away from some players who were really high end college quarterback recruits to take him. So that's always a pretty high compliment. And then the question then becomes who was right. That then puts the onus on the coach's ability to evaluate that player. And obviously Curtis Painter's college Big Ten career, Purdue career, proved Purdue correct because he was a pretty good college player.
Yeah.
And I and Brian, we're going to go back to real gold and black history here because I think it was before Painter's before Andrew Luck. I know Purdue was on the very much on the periphery of Andrew Luck because of some of the relationships that they had with Bill Legg, et cetera, with Oliver Luck, I guess. But anyway, interesting storyline and something we'll probably try to do a little bit more on as
hey, real quick, hey Alan, before we get off this subject, I saw this topic broached on Knucklehead Central. I'd love to have your thoughts real quick. Purdue's the cradle of quarterbacks. Do you consider Curtis Painter to be part of that cradle?
I always felt bad for Curtis Painter only because he threw for a ton of yards and Purdue just didn't win enough. And he had something to do with that. I understand that. It was kind of in a down phase of Joe Tiller's time. But Painter always, outside of injury his senior year, hung in there, and I remember him taking some beatings a few times. So, yeah, I think with those numbers, it's hard to pass up. Hard not to have him where he in the cradle of quarterbacks. Is he one of the elite ones? Is he comparable to the All-Americans and Kyle Orton, et cetera? No, but I think if you put him in that second level, he belongs there in my view.
Yeah, I just to add to that really quickly, I would definitely put him in there. I mean, he had a really good, really productive college career. Now, again, as Alan said, did he necessarily win enough big games? I remember people thinking I was very, very critical of him, including Purdue employees whispering behind my back quite often, pissed off about the stuff I would write about Curtis Painter. Look, Purdue at the time was such a quarterback-centric school that everything that happened from a team perspective reflected on the quarterback. I mean, that wasn't anyone calling Curtis Painter anything but a winner. That was just simply the fact that as the quarterback went in those days, so did the team. And that's simply all that was. That was a matter of a really good college quarterback putting up really good numbers, obviously having NFL talent, Purdue coming up just short a lot, and that kind of being the storyline there. But he was a really good college player, put up unbelievable numbers. Those were some really fun offenses to watch at times, and I think he very much deserves history to look back on him pretty fondly at Purdue in terms of its lineage at quarterback.
Yeah, you look at that 546 yards or whatever that was in the Motor City Bowl. He in his last game against Indiana after he had a bad shoulder. Remember, he lost his starting job there. Didn't lose it. He got hurt. Joey Elliott and Justin Siller came in. Though Elliott never played, I think started a whole game that year. But my point is that he did put up big numbers, and there are times when he was maligned maybe unfairly. All right, basketball recruiting, Brian. You had a little bit of time last week. I know that this show would get a lot of people would watch it and share it if you would declare right now that Harrison Ingram's coming to Purdue. But tell me about what you saw last weekend and what's the landscape looking like on basketball recruiting.
Well, Purdue has 3 live offers remaining out there for 2021 with one spot to fill. It's reasonable to suggest that if the right 2 guys want to come, Purdue could take 2 guys, oversign, and kind of hope for the best. But Harrison Ingram from Dallas is one of them. Blake Wesley from South Bend is another, and Trey Kaufman from Silver Creek is the other. Trey Kaufman being the player I saw last weekend looked really good. I think he just hurt his wrist. I don't know how severe that is, but he looks stronger. He looks quicker. He looks more assertive. He looks more confident. He looks like a big-time player. And, Rivals.com just bumped him up from like the 80s, I think, to like 38th in the country. So it's so hard to tell this spring and summer because this level of competition being played is just nothing like what it would be under normal circumstances. But Trey Kaufman looks really good. There was a point in time where, I think Purdue was kind of wondering, can we take 2 forwards in a 2-man class? My guess is if Trey Kaufman wants to come, Purdue finds a way to get that done because, a lot of people thought that Caleb First took Purdue out on Trey Kaufman. I don't necessarily think that's reality. I think he always liked Purdue to the point where I think that had the first thing not kind of thrown a curveball into this, he would have he might have been committed by the spring to Purdue. But I think he's a really good player. I think he and First could play really well together. And I think Purdue is doing a pretty good job convincing Kaufman of that. He's doing a really good job opening his mind to that possibility. And I think Purdue's a real player there. Everybody thinks he's going to Indiana. It's never been my impression that he's been all that smitten with Indiana. He's had every opportunity under the sun to commit to Indiana and hasn't budged. So I think he's going to play this process out. And that's probably good news for Purdue. I think they're kind of right there. But Purdue needs to get one of these 3 guys to have a hell of a class. If it gets 2 of these 3 guys, you throw a parade because it would be a really, really big-time class.
Yeah. Yanni Karlaftis, we're going to switch back to football, and I think we had announced this week, I believe if I have my days straight, that August 9th will be his day that he commits to wherever he's going. Of course, it's been publicly, or Yanni has said that it's Cal, Oregon, but really Wisconsin and Purdue seem to be the likely choices just because he hasn't been able to visit Cal or Oregon. Brian, speak to that because that is also something that every Purdue fan we've been watching, like we've been watching this one forever, and it's going to be interesting to see where this shakes out at the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sentiment out there too that the West Coast schools are still alive. I mean, I've heard everything under the sun. Probably some of it more credible than others, but it's my belief that it's Purdue or Wisconsin. I think Purdue's done a really good job with him. I have a really hard time seeing him going out west without having had a chance to visit either of those schools. So I guess I'm kind of applying my own logic to it, which that isn't necessarily always, accurate, but I still have to think it's Purdue. I mean, Purdue just has so many advantages. Now, sometimes your advantages become your disadvantages. And, I think one thing the pandemic has done, I think a lot of us, as soon as we have the ability to get away from home, we're out the door, but I think that would be a pretty big step. I think, Purdue's, beyond the simple practicalities of staying local, staying around the family, keeping everything, tight, whatever it may be, is the practicality of it too. I mean, the comfort, the relationship, it should all be there with Purdue. The opportunity to play right away, which is important. Sure. It was always important with Yanni Karlaftis' recruitment that Georgia's experience go well. And Purdue didn't win as many games as it wanted to last year for a lot of reasons. But I don't think George Karlaftis could have asked for a whole lot more from his freshman year than what he got. So I think the experience there has been pretty positive. And I would have to think that's a consideration for Yanni Karlaftis as well. So, I mean, from day one of this, years ago, I've always said, it's going to be Purdue for this kid. And I'm sticking by that. Again, like I said last week, I'd be a little less surprised now if he did something else. That wouldn't have been a couple months ago. But I think everything is possible. But I think Purdue is, I would call it likely. But that's just kind of my guess. I mean, I don't know anything. It's just kind of what I've been able to glean, my suspicions based on the logic of all of this. So that's what I got.
Yep.
I tell you what, Purdue makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I think Brian talked about that. First referencing Big George, a lot of that's on Big George. Big George is a hard worker, and that's evident to anybody who watches him practice or play. Football is important to George, and he was given an opportunity.
Yeah.
He's made the most of it. Purdue has done all it can to put him in a good position to succeed, but again, a lot of effort by George there. We saw the postseason accolades as well. We all know the future is really bright for number 5. Yanni has to be pleased, again, how that script is unfolded for his older brother. You know, going to Cal and Oregon, you guys know what it's like. Brian, you're a guy who actually left home to go to college, went kind of far away from New Jersey to Indiana. For Alan and I, you know, we just crossed the street like the Karlaftis brothers are going to do, or at least what George did. And there's not a lot of sex appeal to that. I understand when you're 18 years old, sometimes you like to spread your wings and go see another slice of life somewhere. And Cal and Oregon seem awfully sexy. They're great schools. Oregon, we all know about their football heritage. But again, to say no to Purdue, to me, would be vexing. But, you know, Wisconsin, as Brian alluded to, seems to be the biggest competition here. And, boy, they have a lot to sell in Madison. We know that from a football standpoint, how they develop their linebackers. So, again, that may be the biggest hurdle for Purdue. But, boy, staying home playing for Purdue, you know you're probably going to get on the field right away as a freshman if you're Yanni and have a big impact. And you're going to be treated as a special player here in West Lafayette as well.
Right.
And just lastly, guys, let me just say this. August 9th is my birthday. I'm a Red Devil. He's a Red Devil, so I think this is all going to line up.
No, there you go.
Let me just add one more thing to that. I came to Purdue from New Jersey. The first time I stepped foot on Purdue's campus was my day on campus after I'd already enrolled. I came hundreds of miles to study journalism at a school who, at the time, I didn't necessarily do the legwork necessary to understand that Purdue didn't have a journalism school. My journalism major ended up entailing basically 6 classes, and thank God for the exponent. The exponent was my education. The first time I went to Madison, Wisconsin, I said to myself, you know what? Had I seen this place out of high school with my priorities being what they are at this point in my life, you know where I would have enrolled? I would have gone to Wisconsin, and I never would have graduated. What my point is, though, is that I didn't see what I was getting into when I left New Jersey to come to Purdue. Yanni Karlaftis has taken one unofficial visit to Wisconsin, and he has not seen Cal or Oregon. So under these circumstances, the known commodity, you know, might be the safest play, whether or not that's what you want to do. He's not had a chance to get wrapped up in the environments, you know, the lifestyles, whatever it may be, at Cal or Oregon or, you know, to a lesser extent, Wisconsin, since he's been there once. So kind of that whole part of it is getting wrapped up in something different is a little bit watered down by the fact that he's not even been able to taste that, except for over Zoom and virtual, you know, whatever it is people are doing nowadays. So
yeah, I'll speak to, boy, I would love to have gone to Wisconsin. I couldn't have gotten in probably. And, you know, you think about that. And like Tom said, my choice was, I had one offer, the University of Purdue. And that's the way it worked out. I also think the family, it's interesting that family dynamics, obviously mom is a West Side person. And grandfather has been very involved in this community for a long time as a physician. So, and real estate owner. So it just is an interesting deal. You don't know, though. Brian's right. You don't know if that sends him going all this direction and or going just the opposite. And Yanni, I don't have Yanni on speed dial, or he doesn't have me. He's not telling me every day what he's doing. So we'll wait till August 9th and find out. It would be a big feather in Purdue's cap, obviously, if Yanni Karlaftis commits to the class of 2021. All right, we are rambling here, which is some good stuff. But I wanted to real quickly talk a little bit about scheduling. And I'll start with you, Tom, on football. We now all know we're looking at 10 games. We talked last week about the reason why the importance of a similar homogenous environments is everything as we deal with this COVID-19 crisis, and the fact that Big Ten schools, we don't know that all Big Ten schools are going to play. And that's an interesting study that we don't know for sure, but we assume that most, if not all, will. And yet that testing can be the same. They can afford the testing, all those factors. But but it will be interesting to see how that schedule lays out whenever it's announced and what it's going to look like. I mean, Tom, any more intel this week about that? And I know you have a theory about how it could break out.
Yeah, nothing definitive. I've still been reaching out to coaches. I know assistant coaches, head coaches, just trying to kind of stay tuned into what they're hearing, so to speak. I'm guessing maybe we'll hear some schedule announcement by late July, early August. And guys, I mean, flexibility, we were told, was a big key to dumping these non-conference games, among other reasons to do it. Alan talked about the health protocols being similar and whatnot too. But flexibility, I think, is a big component of why they went to this truncated schedule. And to 10 conference games. And I don't think when this schedule is released, guys, we're going to see all 10 games for Purdue lined up with dates already. It doesn't make any sense to me to do that if you want to be flexible. If you want to be flexible, you only announce the first 2 or 3 games for every team. You build the schedule as you go along with some built-in bye weeks. So in case there are virus flare-ups, in case a team has its roster compromised by having guys quarantined and can't play, you can move opponents around, you can move dates around. So again, to come out with a schedule that's already got 10 dates and 10 opponents locked in takes all your flexibility away, right? Yeah. So that's just something to keep on your radar. And again, it's going to be interesting to see if it all even pans out. But again, flexibility is key. These non-conference games too, guys, we talked about. Dumping those is going to save the Big Ten a lot of money, right? As it was, Purdue would have been lucky to get 25% capacity in Ross-Ade Stadium. Not the type of revenue you want on game day typically, especially if you're writing an $800,000 check to Air Force from Memphis. So I think a financial component went into this as well. Now, guys, the SEC is wrestling with its scheduling models as we speak. They may want to try to keep some of these non-conference games. You know, the Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State, Georgia Tech. But tell me this. How can you tell if you're Florida, you're playing Arkansas State? How can you say, Arkansas State, we can't afford to play you, but we're still going to play Florida State? I guess my point is the contract in these non-conference games is such where maybe these SEC teams could still be on the hook for some money, because I don't know how you can say we can play one non-conference opponent but not another.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see that the SEC kind of scaled back a little bit of its rhetoric, for lack of a better term, on this, but it's going to be interesting. Brian, and you can comment on football, but also basketball. We saw that the Cancun Challenge got moved from Mexico to Florida, if that even comes on. Do you see the men's basketball and women's basketball following the same all Big Ten format for this, or is it still early to tell on that front?
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of college basketball coaches this week too, and there's some sentiment that Purdue or the NCAA there could be another league-only sort of format applied to basketball as well. That's a long way off. If we have a good couple months here, who knows? But, there's also some sentiment that I think college basketball coaches need non-conference play more than football coaches do because of postseason qualification considerations, strength of schedule, things like that. Now, is there going to be an NCAA tournament? I mean, who knows? But the issue there is that can the high major conferences get together on a standard of testing and oversight? Because the issue with basketball, probably even more so than football, is the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots need to come play at the haves to have athletic departments, but the have-nots don't have the resources to test and manage COVID as the haves do. I hope this is making sense, because this is a word salad if there ever was one. If you're Purdue, you probably trust West Virginia's ability to manage this, their infrastructure, their resources. But do you trust Incarnate Words? Because they just don't have the resources to be able to test their guys as much as Purdue does. That's, I'm not saying necessarily it was the only reason for the football move, but it was a big part of the reason. For the safety and oversight issue, the consistency of policy, of procedure. Basketball is going to be the same way. Now, whether or not that's just a conference thing, whether that could be a high major league thing, if it becomes the high majors and then everyone is just left off playing just their conferences, then you're looking at a significant part of college basketball here that is just going to, for lack of a better term, go out of business. Because the Chicago States of the world, the Incarnate Words of the world, who need these games to have athletic departments, these aren't football schools that have that revenue stream. Their athletic department is funded by their basketball team traveling hundreds of miles to go lose to somebody by 50. I mean, that's just the nature of the food chain in college basketball, both competitively and economically. And it just remains to be seen whether those games are going to be possible this year. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense right now. But, here we are still months away. Purdue's schedule has already been affected 4 ways already by COVID. The scrimmage trip to Boston, the scrimmage against Providence is off. The trip to Spain is postponed. The trip to Boston to scrimmage Providence is postponed. They'll do that later. Europe is postponed. The Yale game is off the schedule because of the Ivy League, and the Cancun Challenge has been moved from Mexico to Florida. So that's already a pretty marked impact on Purdue's non-conference schedule. What happens from here on out kind of remains to be seen. But as we were saying with football 2 months ago, time is kind of on their side. But I do think that college basketball fundamentally is a little bit easier to pull off the actual execution of the game than is football. The indoor thing is a problem, but I think people's ceilings are high enough to where the airflow maybe isn't that big a deal if the place isn't full. The flu season factor is an issue, but I think putting 10 guys on 94 by 50 is a little bit easier to pull off, as the TBT has sort of provided a model for, than it is for 300-pound men to be laying on top of each other for 2 hours in college football, on top of the fact that we still have a few more months to make some headway against this thing. So, it's going to be a really interesting case study on basketball, because there's disadvantages, but there's also advantages, and it's just it is going to be really interesting to see what happens. But I don't really see a whole lot of scenarios where things are as people hope they will be. Fans, who knows? But we'll see what they're able to do in terms of the actual execution of the season. There will be college basketball. I'm pretty certain at this point, but who knows what form it takes. Might not start till January too. I heard that from a coach too. He's worried about their ability to play in early fall. So
a lot of campuses are going to be closed.
Correct.
Too.
Correct.
The on-site learning is going to be
one of the big obstacles here too is the looming grim reaper that is the students' returns to campus too. That is a huge watershed moment in all of that. What happens when that happens? I'm not saying grim reaper to be skeptical about it. I'm saying it will loom large over everything about college sports, about football and basketball. Like, is what happens when all of these kids come back from all over the country, provided they all do. I mean, we shall see what happens. What happens when they all come back? What happens when they're here? Do they change their habits? Do they protect themselves the best they can? Do they protect everyone else the best they can? We have no answers to these questions. So without the first answers to the first questions, we won't have answers to the secondary questions.
I do think there's going to be a couple interesting things that will help. We will have a little bit more data, like the TBT provided to some extent. Maybe some of the major league level stuff, though, again, they have every bell and whistle to protect themselves when I'm talking about what the NBA is going to do, what baseball is going to try to do as well. But you're right. You have two seminal moments. You've got when they come back in the fall, and you may have them if assuming no vaccine, that when they come back in the winter. Already Indiana, for example, IU won't be back until February. You have to think that schools will try to keep that separation between Thanksgiving and when they return after the first of the year. All factors that will be fascinating to watch. All right, guys. Go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
Real quick, this is one real last scheduling note I thought was fascinating. Nebraska, if for some reason, say the Big Ten shuts it down, we're not playing football, but the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC, which all seem to be in lockstep together, say they're going to go ahead and play football in those conferences. Well, there's some thinking in Nebraska that if the Big Ten shuts it down, they would still try to schedule and play some games against non-Big Ten schools. But I asked Jerry DiNardo if that was even a possibility, and he thinks there's no way the Big Ten would let Nebraska do something like that.
Right, no way.
They're outside of
I would think not. Nebraska is an interesting institution because they're the only one that are not in the American Association of Universities in the Big Ten. They're already on it. Oh, what's that?
They want to play football badly.
They do want to play football badly, but it's going to be the Big Ten is going to have something to say about that. But all right, guys, I want to look at what's ahead for next week as we look at the site. Some things that you may come to the fore, Brian, anything in particular that our readers can watch for.
I've still got some basketball recruiting stories I haven't transcribed yet because transcribing is the death of me, and I just can't sit still for long enough to actually do it.
Get Rachel on those.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
We'll happily do that. I did a 25-minute Zoom interview with Sasha Stefanovic last week and a 20-minute Zoom interview with Mason Gillis this week, so I'll have some basketball stuff. Again, the transcribing is the problem, not the writing. The writing's the easy part. But so that stuff, I think there's some football recruiting stuff I've not yet ventured into yet that I'll have to get going on, but we will work on some basketball stuff for next week, and we will have some basketball recruiting stuff next week. There's some kids I need to get on the phone.
It is what it is.
All the usual stuff on top of that.
I'll connect you with Rachel here after the show. And Tom, anything else on your end that you're watching in particular?
Yeah, like I said, I'll try to stay on top of the developing story that is college football 2020 from a Big Ten perspective. So I'll keep making my phone calls and I guess write stories as needed or as appropriate. I'm going to do a what if next week. I always enjoy doing those. Still needed topics. So if any of you viewers out there have something juicy, kind of interesting.
I got an idea.
What do you got, buddy?
What if the Big Ten decides not to play football, but Purdue decides to go play in the MAC for a year? If they win the thing, do you recognize it as a valid championship?
Yeah,
or does the Big Ten's announcement already that – and I only said MAC because of the geographical sense it would make, not because I think Purdue's a MAC program. Don't accuse me of saying that. Or does the Big Ten's announcement of no non-conference games preclude Purdue from doing that? It's a moot point because nobody's playing in a different league this year. So I'm only kidding. But that would be the fun what if, that with a format you can do whatever the hell you want with.
I enjoy doing research on those things. But yeah, I had started my schedule countdown of Purdue opponents this year. I'm gonna have to amend that. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that Boston College preview.
Yeah.
Those are going in mothballs or in the Hall of Fame or whatever. Also, one thing I didn't mention that some of our readers have watched our new line of gold and black T-shirts that we're having some fun with and working with Home Field Apparel, one of our sponsors, and check those out on Knucklehead Central. Had some fun. A lot of people order them on the first day on Thursday, so we're excited to hear about that. I don't know that we can get Brian and Tom to wear our garb all the time. I'm not asking to do that, but I do like Brian's New York. That's pretty good looking. I think our Knucklehead shirt is going to look a little bit like that with the black and the gold and black logo on the back. It's kind of fun, so we'll have some fun with that.
This is like a 7-year-old T-shirt I'm wearing.
Yeah,
at least.
I don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know.
I probably ought to start dressing like an adult for these things.
That's all right. All right, guys. Any other parting shots? We'll look forward to next week. Though I'm going to be on vacation. I think I may pipe in, or I might just let Brian and Tom work it together. They might be a far better show. I don't know. I do want to thank our sponsors, and of course that is Follett's, Purdue Federal Credit Union, East End Grill, 6th Street Dive, First Source Bank. We talked about Home Field Apparel and their new line of gold and black merchandise or T-shirts. Charters Team Remax Ability Plus. Also want to thank our other restaurant sponsors that are trying to make a go of it. Whitaker Inn, not only just a restaurant, but a fine place to visit, and they are open for visitors, just not too far from Bryan, and we're kind of split between where Bryan and I live. Beautiful spot there. And Arnie's and Bruno's, great supporters of us over the years. If you can support them, please do so. But have a great week, everybody. Brian and Tom do the same. We'll look forward to talking again soon, and we'll have an edition next week on our Sunday conversation. Have a great week, all.
Okay.